From the windswept plains of Anatolia to the ancient gates of Jerusalem, from the thrones of kings to the pulpits of popes, the Crusades shaped the medieval world in fire and blood. Between 1096 and 1204, the First through Fourth Crusades unleashed a century of war, ambition, devotion, and betrayal, transforming the Mediterranean world and leaving a legacy still echoed in our time. In this video, we examine the Four Crusades, how they began, what they achieved, and how they ultimately unraveled the very unity they sought to protect. The year is 1095. In the shadow of collapsing borders and rising Turkish power, Byzantine Emperor Alexios I sends a desperate plea to the West. His empire is crumbling under the pressure of the Seljuk Turks, and Anatolia, once the heartland of Byzantium, lies largely lost. Pope Urban II seizes this moment at the Council of Clermont. In a fiery sermon, he declares a holy war. He calls upon the knights of Christendom to take up arms, not for conquest, but for pilgrimage. The goal, to liberate Jerusalem, the sacred city under Muslim rule since the 7th century. What begins as a spiritual summons quickly becomes a tidal wave. Thousands of nobles, knights, and peasants answer the call. Some are driven by religious fervor, others by the promise of land, wealth, and absolution. But the journey is brutal. A premature wave known as the People's Crusade, led by Peter the Hermit, meets swift destruction in Anatolia. The real military force arrives in 1096, composed of hardened leaders like Godfrey of Bouillon and Bohemond of Taranto. They capture Nicaea, they survive a grinding siege at Antioch, and finally in July of 1099, they reach Jerusalem. The siege lasts weeks. When the city falls, the massacre that follows shocks even contemporaries. Men, women, children, Muslims, Jews, none are spared. The bloodbath is celebrated by Crusader chroniclers, but it etches a deep wound in the memory of the Islamic world. Out of the conquest, Crusader states emerge. The Kingdom of Jerusalem and the counties of Edessa, Tripoli, and Antioch now stand as Western enclaves in the east. Fortresses rise, Knights Templar and Hospitallers take root. But these Latin kingdoms are islands in a sea of hostility. Their survival is always precarious, their future already threatened. In 1144, the illusion of security shatters. Edessa, the first Crusader state, falls to the forces of Zengi, a powerful Muslim warlord. The shock waves ripple across Europe. Pope Eugene III calls for a new crusade. This time, kings will lead. Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany take up the cross. The Church pours its energy into the cause. The famed abbot Bernard of Clairvaux travels across Europe, preaching the righteousness of holy war. But the Second Crusade never finds its footing. The German army suffers devastating losses in Anatolia. The French, exhausted and disorganized, reach the Holy Land, only to launch a failed assault on Damascus in 1148. What was meant to reclaim Christian strength ends in humiliation. There is no victory, no territory gained, only retreat, finger-pointing, and deepening division. Yet from the ashes, new Muslim leaders rise. Chief among them is Nur ad-Din, son of Zengi. Charismatic and calculating, he brings Syria under a single banner. His vision of Islamic unity grows, and so does the pressure on the Crusader kingdoms. In 1187, a turning point arrives. Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, has completed what Nur ad-Din began. He unites Muslim forces and with brilliant strategy, crushes the Crusader army at the Battle of Hattin. Jerusalem falls shortly after. For the first time in nearly a century, the Holy City is back under Muslim control. In Europe, outrage boils over. Pope Gregory VIII calls for another crusade, and this time it will be led by the most powerful men in Christendom. Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, Philip II of France, Richard I of England. Their crusade begins in glory but soon stumbles. Frederick drowns in a river crossing Asia Minor. Philip and Richard argue endlessly. Eventually, Philip returns home, leaving Richard to shoulder the cause. Richard proves a brilliant commander. He retakes Acre. He defeats Saladin at Arsuf. His presence alone inspires fear and loyalty. But Jerusalem remains elusive. Lacking manpower and wary of overreach, Richard chooses diplomacy. In 1292, the Treaty of Jaffa is signed. It guarantees Christian pilgrims access to Jerusalem, though the city stays in Muslim hands. The Crusader states retain a narrow coastal strip, a fragile sliver of Latin presence in the Holy Land. The Third Crusade fails to recapture the Holy City, but it stabilizes what remains. It also solidifies the mythic legacies of both Richard and Saladin, symbols of knightly honor in war. By the dawn of the 13th century, the crusading dream is fraying, but the church is not done. Pope Innocent III, the most ambitious pontiff in centuries, calls for another crusade. This one will go through Egypt, now seen as the strategic key to Jerusalem. Venice agrees to supply the fleet at a high price. But when the Crusaders arrive in 1202, they cannot pay. To settle the debt, they agree to sack the Christian city of Zara, a move condemned by the Pope. But worse is still to come. A Byzantine prince, Alexios Angelos, offers riches and ecclesiastical union if the Crusaders will help him reclaim his throne in Constantinople. The Crusaders agree. They reach the ancient imperial city, but promises go unfulfilled. Tensions rise. In April 1204, the Latin armies breach Constantinople's walls. What follows is a massacre. Churches looted, treasures stolen, civilians murdered, holy relics torn from the heart of Orthodox Christianity. The Crusaders install a Latin emperor and carve up the Byzantine Empire. But they have not approached Jerusalem. They have not fought the infidel. The Fourth Crusade ends not in glory, but in infamy. The sack of Constantinople fractures Christendom itself. The schism between Catholic and Orthodox deepens, and trust between East and West is shattered for generations. What do we make of these four great crusades? The first was a triumph of religious fervor and military resilience, but one soaked in blood. The second was a failure of vision and unity. The third proved that diplomacy and honor could coexist with ambition. The fourth? A cautionary tale about how greed and power can corrupt even the holiest causes. Over time, crusading ceased to be about pilgrimage alone. It became a tool of politics, profit, and papal authority. The feudal states in the East blended cultures and built fortresses, but they were never truly secure. And as the centuries progressed, the concept of holy war expanded. Crusades were launched not only against Muslims, but also against heretics, pagans, and fellow Christians. Yet for all the wars and sieges, what remains most enduring is the idea of the crusade, the mythos. For some, a symbol of faith. For others, a legacy of violence. The truth lies somewhere in between. These were not black and white conflicts. Muslim and Christian leaders alike formed alliances across religious lines. Leaders betrayed one another. Mercenaries fought for pay, not belief, and often the lines between sacred and profane blurred beyond recognition. The Crusades shaped diplomacy, warfare, architecture, and memory. They changed how Europeans saw the wider world and themselves. The Crusades were not simply wars. They were reflections of an age, of faith tested by ambition, of violence cloaked in righteousness. Between 1096 and 1204, four crusades carved deep wounds across Europe and the Middle East. They brought fleeting glory and lasting bitterness. They united empires and shattered others. Their legacy still whispers in ancient walls and the sacred texts. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found this exploration illuminating, please like, share, and subscribe for more historical documentaries. And let us know in the comments. Which crusade do you think changed the course of history the most, and why?